This is Gloucester, and these are the precincts of Gloucester Cathedral. Behind them, you can see the tower of the great cathedral itself. And over here is the house of the organist and master of choristers. Some years before the outbreak of World War I, 3 young organ scholars came here to study under the supervision of the then director of music, the famous Victorian musician, Dr. Herbert Brewer.
I would like this morning to be an exercise in harmony.
Good.
I will play you the first 8 bars of my new hymn.
Oh, your new hymn, sir?
Which I would then like you to harmonize each in your own ways.
The war will affect our 3 stars in the dark night in very different ways.
Right, Gurney.
Ivor Gurney is a tailor's son from Eastgate Street in Gloucester. He will be the only one to see active service in the war, and his music and poems will be those of a young, sensitive man homesick for his native Gloucestershire. He will see the war as a private soldier, and his words and sentiments will express the horror, the futility, and the bloodshed of trench warfare.
I rather like that, Gurney. The suspension of the added 4th in the 6th bar. Quite tasteful.
Thank you, sir.
Howells?
This is Herbert Howells, the son of a painter and decorator from Lydney, which is down the Severn Valley by the Forest of Dean. He will go on to become a celebrated composer and teacher. He will also be a modernist, a Vaughan Williams man. None of Dr. Brewer's staid Victorian harmonies for him. He will not serve in the World War because he has a rare blood disease, and in fact, in 1916, the doctors forecast that he only has 6 more months to live.
I find your treatment somewhat astringent, Mr. Howells. The key change to F major in bar 3 is slightly alarming. But I suppose modernism must have its say.
Thank you, sir.
Davis. Davis!
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Did you know you had rabbits in your garden?
Piano.
And now here's a surprise. David Ifor Davis, born in Cardiff. He's just come here from Magdalen College Choir, Oxford, because his voice is broken. You will all know him later as Ivor Novello. And in spite of Dr. Brewer's efforts, he is going to go on to write some of the best known and loved music of the next 40 years. 2 of his songs will become virtually patriotic anthems. In World War II, it is We'll Gather Lilacs from his show Perchance to Dream, and in World War I, before we go on to the dark night of war, some background on our 3 stars. This is the grave of Ivor Gurney at Twigworth Church, just north of Gloucester. He died on Boxing Day 1937, and his funeral on New Year's Eve was described by the composer Gerald Finzi as a sad little affair.
We continue our service with the hymn God is Love, sung to the tune which Mr. Herbert Howells named after this church, Twigworth.
Ivor Gurney died in a mental hospital in Dartford. His London friends, organised by Marion Scott, had taken him. He won a scholarship to the Royal College of Music and studied there before and after the Great War. And it was there that he got involved with the new music set and made friends with composers like Ralph Vaughan Williams and Gerald Finzi. The family had always suspected Canon Cheeseman, who had been their old vicar at Eastgate Street before the war and who was now rector at Twigworth, and had always encouraged the young boy in his love of music and poetry. They felt that it would give Ivor grand ideas and set him off onto the inevitable road to destruction that would lead to London.
From 1905, I saw Ivor all the time until 1911, when he took up the RCM scholarship. He came to see me 2,000 times, almost every day. He used to write down the visits in my diary. I was guilty of introducing him to Kipling, Tennyson, and other poets. I used to make him read them aloud. When he was only 10, he used to read the preface of the prayer book. Lovely English, but big stuff for a boy of 10. He was not always easy, as you imagine.
Gurney, like many unfortunate soldiers, was badly gassed during the Great War. Marion Scott and company were quite convinced that the gassing and his experiences in the trenches led to his subsequent madness. His brother Ronald was not quite so sure. He felt that he'd observed very strange behavior in the young Ivor long before war broke out.
I even wrote to the police asking if he could kill himself. He wasn't always so nice about me. I wrote to him and told him not to shout so damned egotistically about being a better man than me. I told him he was only shouting at the very one he depended on. If he forgot for a while he was such a wonderful man, he might have got better and done something to prove it.
I remember when I first saw him at the college. He was wearing a dark blue 7 pilot's coat, more suitable for the outdoor life than for the composition lesson with Sir Charles Stanford, which by the manuscript tucked under his arm, he was obviously bound. This, I said to myself, must be the young composition student from Gloucester, whom they called Schuett.
Whatever the arguments as to what caused Ivor Gurney to end his days in an asylum, he was the poet of the homesick. He voiced the deep love and longing for all things pertaining to the place where he was born. In his case, his native Gloucestershire. I'm homesick for my hills again. My hills again.
like a huge imprisoning I hear the heart and sound and high. I hear the heart within me cry. I'm homesick for my hills again. My hills again. Cotswold or Malvern, sun or rain. My hills I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. Even from the Lord. My help cometh even from the Lord. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself is thy keeper. He is thy defense upon thy right hand, so that the sun shall not burn thee by day, neither the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. Yea, it is even he that shall keep thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help.
Gurney and Howells explored both the Severn Valley and music together. Both write about an unforgettable evening listening to Vaughan Williams's Tallis Fantasia at a Three Choirs festival concert. In wartime, belief is tested, faith is needed. This is exactly the message of Herbert Howells' music. It is our great good fortune to have on our program with us the actress Ursula Howells, who plays the part of Marion Scott. It is a double fortune because, of course, she is the daughter of Herbert Howells. Ursula, it must have been a terrible blow for your father not to be able to go off and fight with Ivor Gurney and so many of the young men.
To watch your friends going off to fight and the fact that you can't go,
Yes.
I think had a very deep effect on him.
But of course he had his own problem to contend with at that time, which was virtually a death sentence.
Yes, his illness. He had something called Graves' disease, which is a thyroid condition, which I think nowadays is quite curable. But you never hear of it now. But it affected the valves in his heart, and they were giving out. And the big heart specialist of the day said to him virtually, well, you're going to die anyway, will you be a guinea pig? And he said yes. And so for about a year, he was an outpatient at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. And he was one of the first people to have radium. And in those days, they put a pad on the back of his neck and put the radium through that. And he went, I think it was 3 times a week for a year. And then his neck began to burn very badly, so they couldn't give him any more. So they discharged him, but they never really knew what results
So he
would
never
be.
knew quite whether it was going to be successful or not.
He never really talked about his illness. He talked about the war and about Gurney and the horrors of it all, which went very deep. And I think he always had a great love of cathedrals, which I think came from his father. Well, I know it did, because he told me that his father used to give him a piggyback into Gloucester, into this cathedral, because he loved the music.
Ivor Novello is Ruritania, Glamorous Nights, Dancing Years, King's Rhapsody, Perchance to Dream, The Crest of the Wave. The very titles of his hit shows say it all. His biographer, James Harding, writes, stirred by a mood of feverish patriotism that swept through the country, Man decided that Ivor should write what she called a war song. Ivor replied, but ma'am, everybody was writing one.
Well, look at Tipperary.
Well, look at Tipperary. It's a great song.
Well, someone's got to write a successor to it, Ivor, and if you won't, I will.
So she concocted a jingoistic air by the title of Keep the Flags A-Flying and showed it to Ivor.
Do you like it, Ivor?
Like it? It's awful.
Well, it goes straight round to the publishers today.
Over my dead body, replied Ivor. Ma'am, dear, don't you realize how terrible it is? So he sat down and wrote a tune, and a friend of his recommended the American Lena Gilbert Ford to write the lyrics.
They were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the stirring call for men. Let no tears add to their hardship as the soldiers pass along, and although your heart is breaking, make it sing this cheery song.
The story has it that they met at Ivor's flat to discuss the project, and while they were there, the maid came in to stoke up the fire. This simple act, seen by them both, gave birth to Keep the Home Fires Burning.
While your hearts are yearning, though your lads are far away, they dream of home. There's a silver lining through the dark cloud shining. Turn the dark cloud inside out till the
was heard on the streets and in concerts in every music hall, pound court, tea room. And before 1918, it had earned him the small fortune of £15,000. The fate of poor Lena Gilbert Ford was not so fortunate. She died in 1918 when a Zeppelin crossed over Maida Vale and a bomb scored a direct hit on her home, killing both her and her young son.
Under the shade of the great tower, where pass the goodly and the wise,
year in, year out, winter and summer, with scufflings and excited cries, football rages, not told in pages of fame, whereof the wide world hears.
Battle of divided empire, the day boys and the choristers.
So here's to the room where the dark beams cross over.
And here's to the cupboard where hides the cane.
The paddock and Fives Court, great chestnut tall tower.
When Fritz stops his fooling, we'll see them again.
Well, now, gentlemen, this is your first visit to this particular organ loft, an historic occasion, so we'll make it as simple as possible. I want you to identify these keyboards. This lower one here. Gurney.
golf balls, tennis balls, cricket and footballs, balls of all sizes and sorts were sent soaring by wall and arch and ivy, high, high over to banishment.
Poor owner that loses.
And oh, but the bruises, scars and red hacks to cover the brave shins of the boldest, when up and down playground victory surged, victory edged like a wave.
So here's to the room where the dark beams cross over.
And here's to the cupboard where hides the cane.
The paddock and Fives Court, great chestnut, tall tower.
When Fritz stops his fooling, we'll see them again.
little they knew, those boys. How in Flanders and plains of France, in another day, a trial dreadful of nerve and sinew, for 4 long years, should test alway that playtime pluck, that yet should carry them through hell's during worst.
And how Europe should honor them, a whole world praise them, though death tore their bodies and laid them low.
So here's to the room where the dark beams cross over, and here's to the cupboard where hides the cane, the paddock and Fives Court great chestnut tall tower.
When Fritz stops his fooling, we'll see them again.
I'm waiting for you. I want you to know that my heart beats true. I'm longing and praying and living for you. So come back, little laddie in khaki. Just be brave a little while, he'll come to you again. You'll forget the weary days and you'll forget the pain. He'll be proud of all the courage you have shown today. He'll make you forget the time when you used to say, laddie in khaki, I'm waiting for you. I want you to know that my heart beats true. I'm longing and praying and living for you. So come back, little laddie in khaki.
My dear Howler, I'm so glad I got in a second time around, because I like soldiering. I am convinced that had I stuck to music, complete health would have been a very long job.
This life will greatly help. The aim of training troops is to make them as tired as possible without teaching them anything. Take them for a route march, stand them on their heads.
And occasionally night operations, one of which was 11 to 2:15 p.m. a.m., that is. There was language, 18 carat, full-blooded, above-proof, purple verbiage.
More bloody poetry.
Sir.
What's it called this time?
It's called Generations, sir.
Read it then. I'm sure we'd all like to hear it.
Sir. The ploughed field and the fallow field. They sang a prudent song to me. We bide all year and take our yield or barrenness, as case may be. What time or tide may bring to pass is nothing of our reckoning. Power was before our making was, that had in brooding thought its spring. We bide our fate as best betides. What ends the tale may prove the first. Stars know as truly of their guides as we the truth of best or worst. Sir.
The First World War saw for the armed forces an exciting new innovation, and this was the birth of the Royal Flying Corps. Now, Ivor Novello, thanks to influential friends in high places, managed to get himself selected for a very special branch of this flying corps known as the Royal Naval Air Service. It subsequently became the Fleet Air Arm, and this is their splendid museum here in Yeovilton. I wonder what Ivor's overpowering mam would have made of his aspirations to become an airman if she had realized just how frail and flimsy these early airplanes were. And what a difference when you compare them with the present-day counterpart, a plane like the Harrier here. Ivor loved the show of service life. He was fascinated by uniforms, and he even got his civil row tailor to alter it. And later on, of course, he couldn't resist writing a song about it.
They've got a uniform for riding in the ring. They've got a uniform for bowing to a king. They've got a uniform for every duty they fulfill. They still from their drill get the thrill. When you ask them what they think about the war, they all admit they can't imagine what it's for. So they dress up in all their finery each night and day. Then they play, shout and say, we're off today.
I count myself lucky to be in the band. Fancy getting an interesting job in this noble profession of arms. There's something wrong within the state of Denmark. We made our debut at a church parade with that noblest of all march tunes, Marching Through Georgia, Bugles and Brass. Oh, but it was hard work. The band is a soft job usually, but not on the march. I've just taken part in a review. A most impressive sight. 20,000 men, hundreds of horses and wagons, all moving together in an endless line. Fixed bayonets, drawn swords, and our band playing. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I couldn't help wondering how many would come back alive from France. Still, the whole mass rolling forward looks irresistible.
You ask them what they think about the war. They all admit they can't imagine what it's for. So they dress up in all their finery each night and day. Then they play, shout and say, we're off today.
Oh, a poor aviator lay dying at the end of a bright summer's day. His comrades were gathered around him to carry the fragments away. The engine was piled on his wishbone. The Hotchkiss was wrapped round his head. A spark plug stuck out of each elbow. It was plain that he'd shortly be dead. He spat out a valve and a gasket and stirred in the sump where he lay. And then to his wondering comrades, these brave parting words he did say.
Take the manifold out of my larynx and the butterfly valve off my neck. Remove from my kidneys the cam rods. There's a lot of good parts in this wreck.
Take the piston rings out of my stomach and the cylinders out of my brain. Extract from my liver the crankshaft and assemble the engine again.
I'll be riding a cloud in the morning with no rotary before me to cuss. So shake the lead from your feet and get busy. There's another lad wanting this bus.
Ivor Novello is sadly not destined to fly to the fields of Flanders. His active service stopped short when he pranged the plane in the training session, and he's transferred to administrative duties in Whitehall. His war effort will be in the field of entertainment, and he will compose some of the most popular songs of World War I, and again later on in World War II. Songs that give to the civilian populace comfort and helps boost their morale, and which for the troops at the front will give them memories of home and loved ones that will sustain them against the horrors and privations of trench warfare.
Dear Howler, finis est
Or rather, inceptus est. We go tomorrow. Little Howler, you must continue in your path of life, blessing others and being blessed, creating music and joy, and never ceasing from the attempt to make English music what it should be.
I would test God's purposes. I will go up and see what fate he'll give, what destiny his hand holds for me. For God is very secret. Slow smiles, but does not say a word that will foreshadow shape of the coming day. And since he will not tell, I'll prove him. Go up against the naked mouth of hell. And what hereafter? Heaven? Mighty? Oh, if it were mere agony, mere pain, the price of returning there.
Nothing. Days in mud and slush. Then other days. Me.
Are they not all the seas of God?
God's ways.
I watched the boys of England, where they went through mud and water to do appointed things. See, one a stake, and one wire netting brings, and one comes slowly under a burden bent of ammunition. Though the strength be spent, still they carry on under the shadowing wings of death, the ever-present. Hark! One sings, although no joy from the grey skies be lent. Are these the heroes? These have kept from you the power of primal savagery so long, shall break the devil's legion? These they are, who do in silence what they might boast to do. In the height of battle, tell the world in song how they do hate and fear the fate of war.
Here I am in a signal dugout with some of the nicest and most handsome men I have ever met. And would you believe it? My luck, I mean. They talk their native language and sing their own folk songs with sweet, natural voices. I did not sleep at all for the first day in this dugout. There was too much to be said, asked, and experienced.
Lying in dugouts, joking idly, wearily, watching the candle guttering in the draught, hearing the great shells go high over us, eerily singing. How often have I turned over and laughed, with pity and pride. Photographs of all colors, all sizes, subjects. Khaki brothers in France, or mothers' faces, worn with countless dollars. Or girls whose eyes were challenging and must dance, though in a picture only. A common, cheap, ill-taken card. And children, frozen. Babies, waiting on Dickie Bird to peep out of the handkerchief that is his home. But he's so shy. Some with bright looks, calling delight across the miles of land and sea, that not the dread of barrage suddenly falling could quite blot out. Not mud nor lethargy. Smiles and triumphant, careless laughter. Oh, the pain of them. Wide Earth's most sacred things. Lying in dugouts, hearing the great shells slow sailing mile high. The heart mounts higher and sings. But once, oh, why did he keep that bitter token of a dead love? That boy who suddenly moved showed me his eyes wet, his low talk broken. A girl who better had not been beloved.
Gurney didn't set much of his own poetry. Today, Johnny Coppin, who also lives in Gloucestershire, sets Gurney to music in modern style. Maysmore village is only a few miles from Gloucester Cathedral. Ivor wrote this poem to remind us that from every village and hamlet in the land, men went to war in 1914 and again in 1939. Many never came back.
Oh, when we swung through Maysmore, the Maysmore people jeered, and women ran from farmyards, and men from ricks of fear, to lose the sight of soldiers who would before Christmas Day blow Kaiser William's army like mist of breath away. The war, it was but young then, and we were young unknowing the path we were to tread, the way the path was going, and not a man of all of us marching across the bridge had thought our home would linger in our hearts as Maysmore Ridge. When the darkness downward hovers, making trees like German shadows, how our souls fly homing, homing, times and times to Maysmore Meadows. By Ober Ridge that Maysmore men have died in vain to hold, the burning thought but once desires Maysmore in morning gold. Oh, when we march through Maysmore past many a creaking cart, we little thought we had in us love so hot at heart. Oh, when we march through Maysmore past many a creaking cart, we little thought we had in us love so hot at heart.
As I went up by Ovelers, in mud and water cold to the knee, I saw 3 jeering, fleering spectres that walked abreast and talked of me. The first said, "There's a right brave soldier that walks the dark unfearingly. Soon he'll come back on a fine stretcher and laughing for a nice blighty." The second, "Read his face, old comrade. No kind of lucky chance I see. One day, he'll freeze in mud to the marrow. Then look his last on Picardy." Though bitter the word of these first twain, curses the third spat venomously. He'll stay untouched till the war's last dawning, then live 1 hour of agony. Liars the first 2 were. Behold me at sloping arms by 1, 2, 3. Waiting the time I shall discover whether the third spake verity.
We're having a concert in a ruined church behind the lines tomorrow night. Hope they play some ragtimes. Oh, for a good piano.
Ivor Gurney!
How are you? I'm tired of this war. It bores me. But I wouldn't miss it. Not for anything. Everything went wrong. And there was a tiny panic at first, but eventually everybody got on and did the proper job. Except the officers.
It's all right, don't worry. It's the machine guns make those terrifying sound. I was out last week mending wires. 10 of these high explosive just sailed over. A foot would have made a considerable difference to us.
Someone is fighting across the foam, fighting for honor and right. Someone is thinking of home, sweet home, when resting day or night. Someone brushes his hand across his eyes as he thinks of his loved ones dear, of someone who owns a brave British heart. We know who that someone is. Just a Jack or Tommy, just a mother's son, gone to do his duty, to fight till victory's won. Gone to show the Kaiser, almighty though he be, he must not try to trample on old England's liberty.
The line has been broken. The sergeant and a linesman prepare to go along to A Company's line. After plunging along for 50 yards, the linesman taps in. And calling battalion is answered immediately. The break is further afield. They must go on. The line disappears over the top, and they follow it out into the open ground, where their only shelter from continuous gunfire is waterlogged shell holes.
Gone to do his duty, to fight till victory's won. Gone to show that old Kaiser, almighty though he be, he must not try to trample on Great Britain's liberty.
Who died on the wires and hung there, one of two? Who, for his hours of life, had chattered through infinitely lovely chatter of Buck's accent, yet faced unbroken wires, stepped over and went, noble fool, faithful to his stripes, and ended. But I, weak, hungry, willing only for the chance of the line, to fight in the line, lay down under unbroken wires and saw the flashes, kept unshaken, until the politest voice, a finicking accent, said,
Do you think you might crawl through there? Look, there's a hole.
Darkness, shot at. I smiled as politely replied, I'm afraid not, sir. There was no hole, no way to be seen. Nothing but chance of death after tearing of clothes. Kept flat and watched the darkness, hearing bullets whizzing. Thought of music.
This is a secret city.
Go!
Built of marvelous earth. Life was lived nobly here to give such beauty birth. Beauty was in that heart and in that eager Death is so blind and dumb. Death cannot understand. Death drifts the brain with dust and soils the young limbs' glory. Death makes justice a dream and strength a traveler's story. Death drives the lovely soul to under the sky. Death opens unknown doors. It is most grand to
I shot him. It had to be one of us. It was him or me. Couldn't be helped. And none can blame me, for you would do the same. My mother, she can't sleep for fear of what might be a happening here to me. Perhaps it might be best to die and set her fears at rest. The worst is worst, and worry's done. Perhaps he was the only son. Yet God keeps still and does not say a word of guidance anyway. Well, if they get me, first, I'll find that boy and tell him all my mind and see who felt the bullet worst. And ask his pardon, if I durst. All the tangle. Here's my job. A man might rave or shout or sob, and God, he takes no sort of heed. This is a bloody mess indeed.
My dear Howler, your appointment to Salisbury pleases me immensely. And when the letter reached me in a crowded dugout full of men weary of laboring in the mud, it was as light in the darkness.
Gas! Gas!
And what of our 3 stars after 1918? Of Novello, it was a case of success leading to success. In the Second World War, he had another patriotic hymn-like hit in We'll Gather Lilacs, but in a way the war also claimed him as a victim. After a stupid error, he was convicted for infringing petrol rationing regulations and actually imprisoned at Wormwood's Clubs. Somehow, after this, a fantastic career was never quite the same again. He died in 1951. And Ivor Gurney?
The songs I had are withered, all vanished clean, yet there are bright tracks where I have been, and there grow flowers for others' delight. Think well, oh singer, soon comes night.
After being injured and gassed, he was sent to a military hospital. His condition there was described officially as delayed shell shock. But the reports were not good.
Dear Sir, 241282 Private Gurney. In reply to your letter, I have to say that your brother was interviewed by his medical officer last Wednesday and stated that he wished to be sent to an asylum. He admits that he hears imaginary voices which urge him to commit suicide. He has been placed under special supervision in order to provide for his safety.
There is still fine music and poetry to come from the pen of Ivor Gurney. But after breaking up his brother's home, he was committed to Barnwood Asylum in Gloucester. Later, his London friends have him brought here to Dartford, and here he will spend the rest of his days.
Yesterday, I felt and talked to the spirit of Beethoven. It means that I've now reached higher than ever before. In spite of the dirt, coarseness, and the selfishness that is so much of me. Bach was there. He doesn't care for me. And Schumann also. But my love for him is not so great.
He claimed he was tormented by electricity. It manifested itself chiefly in thought. Words were conveyed to him. They were often threatening, and they have been obscene and sexual.
He saw things when he was awake, faces, etc., that he could recognize. He also had a twisting in the inside.
With regard to suicide, he had such pains in the head, he felt he'd be better dead.
There grow flowers for others' delight. Think well, oh singer, soon comes night. Soon comes night.
Beethoven said, among other things, that he was fond of me, and that in nature was like himself as a young man. I should probably not write anything really big or good, for I'd started much too late and had much to do with myself spiritually, and much to learn. Still, he said that he himself was not much more developed at my age. I couldn't get much about Howells of L. Van B. The memory's faint. He was reluctant to speak. Whether Howells is to die or not to develop, I couldn't quite gather.
left with Ivor Gurney asking his friend Beethoven about how Herbert Howells was going to get on. And Beethoven, it seems, was rather reticent to answer the question. But how did he get on?
He really went on from strength to strength, I suppose. His health improved and bit by bit. And in the end, I mean, he had a long and healthy life. He never had any other illnesses of any.
Yes, how then, what happened when World War II came? Because we're just about at the outset of World War II.
Well, World War II, he plunged himself into, you know, because by then, of course, he was too old to fight anyway. So his great war work was replacing all the young professors and young organists that he could, who'd gone off to fight. He took over the choir at King's College, Cambridge, for most of the war, anyway. And, of course, the college, there were many young professors who had to go and fight. So he really never stopped working. One saw very, very little of him. He was dashing around.
He seemed to have a great deal of energy.
Oh, enormous energy. We always wondered if it was the radium still coursing through him.